how I am with PowerPoint, so I need you to tell me what you see on the screen. All right. Dr. Garrett, can you see the presentation or do you see something different?
We see the presentation. You're good now.
Perfect. All right. So again, welcome to you all who are here. You are here with the Research Faculty Manager team, the Office of Dissertations. We are here again this Wednesday providing you guys some support. I'm Dr. Johnson. I am joined by my colleagues, the future Dr. Brian Longcar. Not too long from now, he will be there, Dr. Garcia and Dr. Garrett. So if you're just getting a chance to join again, we would love for you to go ahead and complete the pre-webinar poll. Also, if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A function as we move through the webinar. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started because we got a lot to cover. Sometimes I get done quicker and sometimes I don't, but I just want to make sure I'm able to get through everything. All right, so here's our agenda for today. Again, we have the pre-webinar poll. I'm just going to revisit those 3 levels of drafting and revise and scholarly content that I did in the previous webinars, just to refresh you guys' memory. We're also going to talk again about, taking that off. We're not going to use, talking about how to use the template to determine what sources you should use to draft and revise. But this time we're going to do a little more focusing on some higher level things such as alignment and a good approach to getting your review of the literature in your chapter 2 done. 30 pages is a lot to draft. And because it's a lot to draft, it's usually the monster of the proposal. And then also too, just kind of giving you some ways where you can do that strategically and on purpose using the template. So when you go in there to draft it, to get that first draft out and on paper, you're starting with your end in mind. We're going to talk again a little bit more about constructing a problem space and some approaches that you can take to do that. I'm going to give you a framework to develop alignment and to continue to think about alignment along the way. And then we're going to talk about utilizing the alignment table. It is an amazing resource, small, but it's an amazing resource to make sure that things are there as you need them and as you are revising and thinking through how to develop and conceptualize your study. Again, I'm just going to reintroduce a logical paragraph and logical sentence structure. And then we're going to dive in a little bit more about drafting those themes, topics, those subsections in your review of the literature. Dr. Garrett has already done a webinar on using MaxQDA. She's going to do that again in the future. Dr. Garrett won't be available next week to do her webinar. So what I'm going to do is continue forward next week for her. And she's going to pick up in September to give you guys some more resources there. But getting those themes and those topics down can be a little bit challenging in terms of how to write and what content to put in there. So I'm going to give you some things there to help you out with that. And then once we get an introduction of that, I'm going to dive in a little bit into the criteria. If you remember back to some of the previous webinars that I've done, I've talked about what it means to use the rubric criteria in order to develop your research knowledge and also to understand what types of research knowledge needs to be put in there. That also helps with skills and identifying which tasks you need to take to get those done. Then at the end, as we always do, we're going to have a Q&A and then our post-webinar poll. So again, if you're just joining, please do pre-webinar poll. And if you have questions, go ahead and put them in Q&A and the team will go ahead and address those for you. All right. So as we talked about a couple of webinars ago for me, and introducing some things that I have learned, one, not only as a student, but as a chair and as a research faculty manager, noticing that there are 3 different levels in which a student goes in and drafts and revises their work. Now, I'm sure there may be more levels as this evolves over time, but for right now, this seems to be standard. And so I want to reintroduce those again. So at first level, again, you're going in and you're going to be drafting to include content and concepts and to apply the knowledge from previous research and text information. So what that means is that you're drawing on previous research and text information to draft your particular sections. Dr. Garrett, do me a favor, go ahead and mute.
In the poll.
I'm sorry?
You want me to mute?
It's okay. All right. So again, that's drawing on previous knowledge, the things that have already been given to us for that section. So for example, if we're introducing our dissertation topic, we're looking at previous research and text knowledge on what it means to actually introduce that topic. Maybe we have some concepts that are not normal for people to see. So we have to really define that out so people have a really clear picture of what we're trying to do. Maybe you need to go back and you need to look at previous research and text knowledge in terms of developing the background of your study and then moving into giving a background of your problem and what your problem space actually is. Notice I said there's 3 different things there. Using text and previous research to actually develop the background of the study, then the background of the problem that your study is actually going to address, and then providing the problem space. So you have to look at previous research to be able to do that. And then you're also looking at previous research to find out, what's the best fit in terms of methodology and design. That's alignment, and really trying to understand that and make sure that our readers, and that would be our committee members, that would be AQR, things like that, to make sure that those things are there so that you know exactly what to put in there. And so that's looking at previous research and text knowledge to gain that and put it in there. We'll dig a little bit more in just a little bit. Hopefully that explanation wasn't confusing. And then that level 2, once you get that on paper, right? Now you need to go back in and you need to look to see if the information that you put in there is actually relevant, not only to your study, but it's also relevant to what the rubric criteria are actually asking you to do. So 2 things. Is the information relevant to your study? And is the information relevant to what the rubric criteria are actually asking you to do? And then 3rd, coming back in and revising again to ensure that the rubric criteria are actually addressed. But then a 2nd thing, you're demonstrating that you understand research. You understand what it means to conceptualize research. You're demonstrating that you understand what it means to implement that research. And you're demonstrating that you know what it takes to actually do the research. So those are those 3. All right. So this one here is actually 2nd level, level 2. So level 2 here. All right. So here, this is 2nd level. Now, when you're going in to revise, you have to make sure that previous research and text information actually support your problem space. It has to support it. So if you're pulling things in that doesn't actually support it, that could be an issue. So what does it mean to actually pull things in to support it? Your dissertation is not to redo what is already known. Your dissertation is actually to look at, investigate, examine, explore, those types of things, what is not known, right? But in order to do that, you need to provide support based on what is already known. Then taking it in a 2nd step, okay, you got support, but it actually needs to be justified. And there are some very distinct ways to be able to do that. So the difference between supporting something and justifying something, you can support it, but justifying actually demonstrates that this needs to be done, right? And pulling that prior literature in that problem space to be able to do that. And then next, coming in, revising to demonstrate alignment among the core concepts, aspects of the proposed study, excuse me. And so in doing that, that's the next level that you're coming in to actually do that revising. And then finally, revising to demonstrate that you have the ability to understand and conduct research, right? So that's those 3 levels. All right, so I'm gonna slow down a little bit here because like I said, I wanna make sure that you guys are getting something of value. So a problem space, this is the way we look at things here at GCU. It used to be called a gap or a need. A problem space can be constructed by looking at previous literature in very specific ways. One thing you wanna make sure is that whatever you're doing, your literature that you're using to present these arguments are within the last 2 years. So the way that you do that is if you look at these bullet points here in the center, 1, you're looking at a community and societal need that your research will address. Still needs to be supported. You can't go pull it out of thin air. It still needs to be supported. So for example, if you are looking at things in an educational context, right? And in an educational context, things have been investigated by looking at students, or they've been looked at in terms of looking at what the teachers have done, or at an achievement level, or at a learning level, right? When you're looking at these things from a communal and a societal standpoint, you're looking at how these problems within those spaces impact out. Now, when we talk about community and society, those communities and those societies that you're looking at actually need to connect to the problem space that you're proposing. So community, maybe it's a school, maybe it's a district, right? Societal, looking at the implications that it has outside, but still connecting to that particular aspect. So there's one area. The second one, you're going to look at broad areas of your research, and then how it will, broad areas of research your research will contribute to. So when we're talking about broad areas, maybe it's theoretical, right? That's one way. Looking at it in those ways. But again, the literature actually has to support this. And then what needs to be better understood? Is there something the literature is actually saying, we don't have a good understanding of this, and that's where your research can come in at. Weaknesses in studies. So weaknesses can be things like maybe the study didn't have access to different people in different contexts, but looking at that same maybe group of people. That's one example that I can think of. Limitations, that's actually the scope that's put on the study. You have to put a scope on your study. So for example, from a research design standpoint, you're going to limit it to looking at it maybe as a case study, not descriptive, not phenomenological. Maybe you're limiting it to only looking at it quantitative, things like that. So those are some areas of ways you can look at limitations of studies. And then the easiest one is recommended future studies. So this is looking at recommendations for future research. That's the easiest one to do. And then arguments for various types of replication studies. So maybe these authors actually said that this needs to be looked at again, but in a different context. So when you're looking at these different areas under these bullet points, a problem space can be constructed using several of those, right? But in using several of those, they have to logically connect to each other, okay? So that is a good way to construct a problem space. Then what you're going to do is once you do that, you're going to synthesize your arguments, bring them together to justify that problem space for your study, and then develop your problem statement from that. And I'll give you a strategy for that in just a minute. So again, a problem space is really a synthesis of you constructing a space based on these ways to actually define your research need. And then you're going to synthesize those to make that space. They all have to logically connect and align, okay? So you can't go say, this might be very extreme, but I'm going to look at the implications of business in a classroom. The only way that may be able to connect is unless it's a business classroom where the classroom actually feeds into business. They have to connect. And I know that was very extreme, but that's one thing that I can think of. And then finally, once you do that, you're going to discuss how this set of arguments leads up to the topic and the problem statement in your study. All right. So I'm pretty sure we got some questions there. We'll work through answering them as we can, and then we'll talk a little bit more at the end. All right. So a framework for developing alignment. All right. So what I want you to do here when you're looking at this slide, put your attention to the left-hand side of the slide first. So in developing the core components of your study, it's iterative. Trust me, you guys, it's iterative. It works sometimes backwards and forwards, sometimes cyclical, all depending on what you find in the literature to actually provide this support and justification for what you're doing. All right. So one, in doing this helps you develop your understanding of the process. And so what I mean by developing your understanding of the process if you look at alignment, alignment is really not just looking at how things connect in words, right? But it's also looking at conceptualizing it, implementing it, and then actually executing, and then how you're going to report your findings and your results. So it gives you that understanding of the process. And I'll show you a little bit more when we get on the right-hand side. Then the second thing in developing these core components is to gain a better understanding of the research knowledge needed to understand what research skills are needed to develop those core components of your study. So for example, when we're talking about skills, if you're going to do things quantitatively, you have to have a certain skill set to be able to do that. What are those skills? That's one of the things that you need to be able to look into, because when you go into chapter 3 for writing that, you're going to have to talk about the procedures and the steps that you're going to take to get things done. So again, that's that development of understanding the process. Next bullet, it's crucial to keep the alignment in mind as you go through. As you keep the alignment in mind and understand alignment of this proposed study, and sorry, those two bullets probably should be together. You need to notice how those major components of the proposed study flow together from the problem space. So they're going to flow out of that problem space into the problem statement, research questions, and the like. So now let's move over here to the right side. After you have constructed that problem space, you'll be able to look at that to look at your research questions. So for example, you need to know how to state research questions quantitatively and qualitatively, how to state research questions based on design, right? All of that is flow and alignment. And then that problem statement. Ultimately, the problem space, once you construct that, comes out to be the research questions, the problem statement, and the purpose statement. Where the rubber starts to meet the road is you understanding which methodology is the best fit, and then which design. So if you come down here to number 6 on the right-hand side, right? The purpose of that study determines your design. What's your end goal? That determines the design. And then that leads you to consider the population and sample, your data collection approach, then looking at what kind of instrumentation, quantitative, sources of data, qualitative, and then your data analysis, all looking at that alignment. So they all have a flow and coming in together. When the faculty member that gave me this, I was in my content courses, and she gave me this, I remember sitting down and writing it down and just getting it out of my head. Next week, when I present, I'm going to talk a little bit more about GCU's core designs and how you can use those to really go in and use this framework more directly. But if you look at this, that's how everything flows out, right? So we're going to move to the next one. I'm sure we got some questions there. I want to give some time to do that. So this is the alignment table. I'm sure some of you have seen it. Some of you have not seen it. So what this does is it gives you a really succinct and concise way of putting those core components together, and then it gives you a chance to actually just look at them and see if there's some things that may be off, right? So you put this problem space in. Does it directly connect conceptually to the problem statement? Is there some wording that's off in there? Is it too complex? Looking at things like that in addition to the purpose statement. Now that you have those out, now you're considering what phenomena am I going to investigate? What variables am I going to look at if you're quantitative? So phenomena, qualitative, variables, quantitative, and really looking at the problem space so that you can call out what that actually is. So I'll use my dissertation as an example. My problem statement was, it is not known how dissertation chairs use design thinking to coach dissertation students to develop their research self-efficacy and their dissertation. Okay, that was my problem statement. My purpose statement, the purpose of this, same thing feeding out of that. Now looking at that, I'm looking at the phenomena because I'm doing a qualitative study. What phenomena do I need to look at? Well, I'm looking at coaching, one, and I'm looking at whether or not the chairs use design thinking. So for me, my phenomena was the coaching process because I'm doing a case study. Running through this very quickly, but this is how I had to get through it. All right. I'm looking at the phenomena within the process of coaching, particularly the factors that are associated or contribute to that coaching process. How am I using this language? Because I understood what I was doing. I'm doing a case study. Those are language terms that come along with that particular design. And then my sources of data, just understanding here at GCU, per the template, I need 3 sources of data coming into that. It is typical to do a thematic analysis when you're doing a qualitative study. There is my data analysis. So this is where it helps him with that. Keeping that alignment table near you, when you go back in and you're looking at the literature, now you can start looking at ways to add literature to bring things in to actually support and justify your study. So that is a good way of using the alignment table. All right. So in previous webinars, I talked about logical paragraph and sentence structure. So again, when you're writing logically in terms of your sentences and your paragraphs, your micro, meso level, and then macro, your sections and your chapters, you want to make sure that your paragraphs have a topic, support, conclusion. That is the best way to structure a paragraph. Tells your reader, here's what I'm going to talk about in this paragraph. Now you provide support for that, and then you conclude. That's a paragraph. A good rule of thumb would be to avoid writing more than 5 or 6 sentences in a paragraph before finding a logical place to break. So if you're drafting, you get about 5 to 6 sentences out, it's good to stop, look at that paragraph, and see if you actually changed topics, or whether you're running the risk of starting to become redundant because you're adding more than what's needed there. And then next one, typically there are 3 to 8 sentences in a paragraph, and a paragraph should never be longer than a full page. So I want to kind of park right here for just a little bit, because when I'm going to present next, this is very, very important. So look at this bullet point, 3 to 8 sentences. That's a typical paragraph, and a paragraph is never longer than a page. So good concise paragraphs typically run about a half a page to 3/4 of the page. Sometimes you get off into a page, but that's your good rule of thumb. So your review of the literature in chapter 2 has to be 30 pages. So the best way to start approaching writing your review of the literature is to think about taking the rubric criteria and deciding in advance how many paragraphs I'm just going to at least get on the paper to get started, right? And how I'm going to logically put those together so I get them on there, right? So if you have, and I'll show you in just a little bit, if you have a mind to get about a good 8 to 9, and I would say probably 8 to 10, this is what I've seen with my students, and this is the way it worked for me as well, about a good 8 to 10 paragraphs. Remember, I said about a half a page to a full page, right? So if we got a half a page and you have 8 paragraphs, just getting them on paper, and you started based on the rubric criteria, half a page, 8 paragraphs, looking at 4 pages right there, right? But if you're upwards to that 10 paragraphs, roughly saying that they're half a page, you got 5 pages right there. In your review of the literature, you need these topics and you need these themes, right? So here's one of the best strategies that you can do. You're gonna have theoretical foundations, okay? So a good rule of thumb, do a good review of the literature on your theoretical foundations. So let's say, for instance, you have 1. Now you're driving it more in. Let's say, for example, you have 2 or 3 theoretical foundations, right? At least getting those out. That's the bigger part of the funnel. That's broad. Now you're going to draw it in where it becomes more relevant to your topic. Let's say you have some concepts and some ideas that really need to be fleshed out because they're so applicable to your study. After your theoretical foundations, you do the review of the literature. Those can become topics, and then you flesh out a little bit more going into there. So let's say, for example, you have 5 or 6 review of the literature topics in there, 5 or 6. If you have at least 8 paragraphs based on the literature, and you have 5 topics in there, right? And remember, I said, we're just saying here for the sake of conversation, half a page per paragraph. You got about 8 paragraphs in there, that's 4 pages. Times 5 topics, 20 pages right there. You got them on paper. And you already started by looking at the rubric criteria. Then you come back up and you do that revising, because you may have to add to that, and it starts to expand it out. Now, the other thing to look at in the review of the literature section is it's like each theme or topic is like a little mini essay, right? So if you think about this, think about topic, support, conclusion from a sectional standpoint, a subsectional standpoint. So you have an introduction to that particular topic. You got that 8 or 9 paragraph, 8 paragraphs, 10 or whatever in there to provide that support, and then you conclude it. Now you just kind of stretched yourself out to about 25, closer to 30 pages, right? So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's a good strategy to get things going. All right, so now we're down in bullet point number 4. A paragraph will usually consist of a collection of sentences that have something in common when considered as a group. So if we're thinking about this from your review of the literature topics, those paragraphs that are in there are all about that topic in the review of the literature. They're all about that, right? You can use this strategy through your whole proposal or dissertation, and it works. Coming down into the 5th bullet point, structuring sentences effectively is a key feature of successful academic writing. So as I introduced before, an easy, readable way of looking at things is structure your sentences so that they're subject, verb, object, right? Subject, verb, object. Academic writing is very formal. Scholarly writing is a little more formal than academic writing, and this is some ways you approach that, right? So, all right, now let's get down into the nitty-gritty here, the review of the literature. All right, so if you see here, I'm giving you looking at these paragraphs and some ways to think about it. So again, about 8 to 9 per theme or topic, right? If you're considering, what do I do? Review of the literature and your theoretical foundations, pulling it into those things that are relevant to your topic, and then your actual topic within itself, all right? So you need an introductory paragraph. That's 1 paragraph. The next thing that you're going to need is 1 or 2 paragraphs. Now, if you're quantitative, you're going to describe each research variable in the study. This is all in the template in the rubric criteria. So if you're wondering where it is, just go print the template out and you'll see it there. And then if you're qualitative, you're going to describe the phenomena being explored in the study. 1 or 2 paragraphs there. Okay, I'm going to dig a little bit more in just a little bit. So remember, we're just going to go for the sake of just getting it out on paper. If all you can get out is a paragraph that's a half a page long, you got that introductory paragraph. Now you got 1 or 2 paragraphs in this number 2 here. So roughly a page and a half right there. Then for criteria number 3, if you look in that, it's very specific as to what you need. And it's 5 things that gets listed in there. So if you put 5 paragraphs in there, now we got number 1 being a half a page. Number 2, we're running on a page and a half. And then we get in number 3, now we got about 5 pages. Now we're here in number 4, you need 1 paragraph that identifies the themes that emerge. What do I mean by this? We'll talk about that in just a little bit, but just to give it quickly, if you are doing a review of the literature on that topic, you're going to start to notice, was this investigated more quantitatively or qualitatively? You're going to start to notice the typical sample type that they looked at it in. You're going to start to notice typical context that they put it in. Those are the types of things that'll start to stand out, right? Looking at those patterns in there, all right? And that's some ways that you can go there. So now we're in this one, you got that 1 paragraph. Now we're about 6 pages, okay? Now we come down here to number 5, 1 to 3 paragraphs with summaries. 1 that compares and contrasts alternate perspectives. 2, provides a synthesis of the themes relative to the research topic. Those themes, what are we talking about there? Number 4, the themes that emerge. And 3, how the themes are relevant, right? So you got that in there, okay? Now, if we got 1 to 3 paragraphs, once we got to 4, we got the 6 pages. Now we're running about 7, maybe 8 pages, depending on how you write. Now you have number 6, which actually should be taken out. That was on the old template, please forgive me. And then I'll remove that. But coming down here to this concluding paragraph, now you got about 8 pages. See what I just did there? That's just getting it out of your head on paper. So you get that one theme or topic down, move to the next one. Now you got this draft, this rough draft coming back up. You go backwards. You're coming back in, you're revising. One, to make sure the content and the concepts are there. You're making sure what you got there is actually relevant and connects to your study. And you're revising to make sure that those rubric criteria are actually met. You're coming in again, digging a little bit deeper, making sure you got what's needed there to actually support and justify your study. You're looking for that alignment that's there. Are you talking in a way where you're ensuring that your reader knows that you're doing something, moving in a certain qualitative, quantitative, things like that? That's the first thing that comes to mind. And then that you understand exactly what the literature is actually saying has been done and what needs to be done, all right? Okay, so we're here. So I just gave you a strategy to get down a good draft review of the literature. You started with the rubric criteria in mind. You're revising with the rubric criteria in mind. What I have my students do, and it works very well, let me come here. All right, so criteria number 5 in the review of the literature section in the template, if you go there, it'll say that you need an introductory paragraph explaining why the topic or theme was explored relative to the overall dissertation topic. So there's that introductory paragraph, right? So you're starting it and you're making sure criteria number 5 is addressed. What I have my students do, they'll just put a comment. Criteria number 5, or introducing topic, whichever way it works well for them. It also helps them keep in mind that this is the purpose of this particular paragraph in this section, right? Criterion number 2, remember I said 1 to 2 paragraphs. If you're quantitative, you're going to describe each variable in the study, discussing the prior empirical research that has been done on the variables and the relationship between the variables. That's what the rubric criteria is actually asking you to do. If you're qualitative, you're going to describe the phenomena being explored in the study, discussing prior research that has been done on the phenomena. That means you need to have an actual understanding of your variable, and you need to have an understanding of what phenomena is and how to describe the nature of your phenomena. You need to know how to do that. If you don't, you just do some reading on it. So that's criterion number 2. Criterion number 3, remember I said a minimum of 5 pages, right? You go in there, it's going to say in the themes or topics, but I mean 5 paragraphs, excuse me. But if you go in here and you structure these this way, right, you got 1 paragraph, number 1 here in the italics, studies focus on a problem from a societal perspective, right? Just get it on paper. Not saying it doesn't need to be expanded later on, but you got it on paper. Number 2, second paragraph, studies describing and or relating to the variables. Maybe you can't get that done in 1 paragraph. Great. If you get more paragraphs, you're closer to that 30 pages, all right? Number 3, third paragraph, studies related on related research, such as factors associated with the themes, right? So we already talked about, those themes in the prior slide. And then number 4, studies on the methodological approach, instruments used to collect the data. So this is the quantitative folks. And then 5, right? Studies on the broad population of the study. And then here, I missed one, 6, right? You actually can get 6 paragraphs out there because you got to do studies similar. Maybe you can get these together, synthesize in some paragraphs. But again, this is a good approach to just get it down on paper, right? So that's criterion number 3. Number 4, criterion number 4. Learn structures the literature review in a logical order, including actual data and accurate synthesis of results from reviewed studies as related to the topic. The learner provides a synthesis of information, not just a summary of findings. One of the best ways that my chair taught me how to do this and approach this, and I actually show my students, is you can do one paragraph that identifies those themes that emerge. Remember, I talked about that theme that's there. So the themes that emerged in the review of the literature on that particular topic for your review, that section, subsection of your review of the literature. And in an area that identifies some limitations and some weaknesses, because again, that demonstrates the area of opportunity that can provide some additional support and justification for your problem space. So that's criterion number 4. Criterion number 6, 1 to 3 paragraphs, and then we got these down here: compares and contrasts, alternative perspectives of the topic, provides a synthesis of the themes relative to the research topic discussed that emerged from the literature. So remember, it's in there, right? And identifies how those themes are relevant to the dissertation topic, your research methodology, selected instrumentation if you're quant. Qual, you don't need to talk about selected instrumentation because we don't use instruments. So for those that need clarity on what an instrument is, this could be a valid and reliable survey or something of that nature that's quantitative that has been used in literature before. For those that are quantitative, sources of data, interviews, focus groups, those are considered sources of data. And then finally here, criterion 7, I'm just gonna wrap this up, a concluding paragraph that provides additional arguments for the need for the study that was defined in the background to the problem section in chapter 1. Right, so let me back up again. I just talk like an auctioneer. You look at this slide when you go back in, if you're taking notes right now, and hopefully you are, when you go back into DC Network, once this gets put in there and cleaned up, if you go back in there, you're looking at this to get that understanding of what you should do to put those paragraphs together, right? And thinking about, okay, if I'm doing it this way, and typically I write paragraphs that may be a half a page, or maybe I'm really wordy and I need to get it down to where it's less than a page, this is a good way to start thinking about some things. So there's that. And again, review of the literature section, since it's the biggest part of chapter 2, this is a good way for you to get about a good 8 or 9 paragraphs drafted and put down that were structured based on the rubric criteria. In previous webinars, I talked about doing outlines. I did an outline for mine. I was just able to get it in there and then transfer it into the template, and it had a good flow and people understood what I was actually saying, mainly my chair and my content expert. If you look in chapter 2 in the rubric criteria, you will also notice too that your methodologist looks at 2 sections, your identification of your problem space section, as well as your problem statement section in chapter 2, right? So those are the things based on the rubric criteria. So let's just kind of recap here before we stop and start asking questions. So again, I provided just recapping on the 3 levels of writing and drafting using scholarly content, all right? Ways to use the template to determine what sources you actually need. I think I probably should back up just a little bit here with that. So let's come back here with just looking at, when we're talking about using the template to discover, what sources do I actually need to write this? Again, for quantitative, you need to put some things about the variables that you are going to examine. So you need some previous research on those variables, right? They need to be well defined. You need to show how they've been investigated in the past, how you're going to do it, and from there. Same thing with looking at the phenomena if you're qualitative. You need actual studies and content that focus on that, right? You need to be able to look at the content from previous research, and you need to be able to compare and contrast alternative perspectives. What are the proponents saying? What are those that are not really in agreement that these are the best approaches? What are they saying, right? And then also you're looking at that so that you can determine, okay, this has been looked at a lot this way. It has not been looked at a whole lot in this way. And the research actually supports me being able to look at it in this particular way, all right? Let me go forward a little bit more for the sake of time, all right? So we talked again about some ways to construct the problem space. So let me just back up again. That's this particular slide. So when you come back in and you use this PowerPoint later, this is the slide that you actually do that, right? Ways to utilize that alignment table, again, concise. This is particularly good if you have been out of your program for a while. This is particularly good if maybe something is out of alignment with your methodology or your design. It's a way to pull things right there so that you can look at it and start refining it and adjusting it and reframing things so that it all fits in together. Then we talked about some ways to logically put paragraphs and sentences together. And then I gave you an approach to actually get a draft of your chapter 2 down. Now, not only does this work in drafting, it also works in revising. So I think I might have told this story in a previous webinar, but I kind of discovered this after I had gotten a good chunk of my review of the literature done. And so I was able to use the strategy with drafting, and then I was able to take what I did in terms of revising, and I just took my sentences and I tried popping them into my outline that I created. And if they didn't fit or something was out of place, or maybe it could be used in another area, I was able to move things around so that I can get that prose, that logical flow built in. So you can use it that way. So that will actually conclude what I have. These are some of the resources that I gave you guys before. Again, just some things that I use to build some of my foundational knowledge when I was a student. They're good reads. I go back to them even now as a chair when I need to find ways to try to explain things. And also when I'm providing support to students who are facing some sort of challenge. All right, so now with questions. Team, if you can, Dr. Garrett, if you could go ahead and put up the post-webinar poll and let me know if there's anything I need to clear up.
Dr. Johnson, one of the questions that has come up is there a form to show how to complete a full outline of the literature review?
There isn't, but if you go back to, and the link, we can provide that. But if you go back to my first part of this series, which was done in May, there is a formatted outline in there for you to be able to refer to, but we don't have one from the college. Good question.
Someone else had a question. Rebecca had a question about how do you track the 75% rule for your references?
Good question.
So, yeah, good question.
And so one of the things that I did that's more practical rather than just trying to count, I heard towards the beginning of my program that a good rule of thumb for a paragraph is to have about 3 to 5 citations per paragraph. And I never got any dispute on that. They also said in these 3 to 5 citations that you haven't really demonstrated you've done a thorough review of the literature if those citations continue to repeat paragraph, 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 after paragraph after paragraph. So one of the things that I did with knowing that is 75%, if you think out of 3 to 5, not really an even number, but if I could get 3 citations in there, I would strive to have at least 2 current. If I had 5, I would strive to have at least 3 out of that 5 current, and that's a good way to manage it. Dr. Garrett, did you have something to add?
I was going to add that ReciteWorks. You can use ReciteWorks to check your references. You can check them by year in ReciteWorks to see, and you can do a count of how many you have. It'll give you a count of how many you have for each year.
Thank you. And Rebecca, no, my PowerPoint does not actually have a complete outline in it. It shows an example of how to construct an outline. You will have to do that on your own. I did have a conversation earlier. We are considering putting the recordings up for mine at a later date, probably in the next 3 to 4 weeks. So you should see them there. Very good question.
Mary Power has her hand raised. Mary, because this is a webinar, you can't talk live, but if you post your question, if you're able to post your question in the Q&A, we will answer it for you.
All right. So, any
And
other-
Amy Jo's question was, is the 75% rule applied to references or to citations? And it is to the references.
Your references and your citations are going to go hand in hand. So you can't cite something without having a reference. So
Mhm.
it applies to both, actually.
But you may cite a reference more than one time in the document,
There
but
you
the
go.
75% is based on the number of references, not the number of citations.
Good clarification. Gary. Thank you. You're welcome, Amy. How can you check for plagiarism? You can purchase Turnitin. I had to do it in my master's. Grammarly also has a plagiarism function on it, but it hasn't proved to be very effective. But I would say purchase Turnitin. That's probably going to be your best approach.
Mhm. There's other software out there. I haven't used any ones other than the what we have in the GCU classrooms, and I've used Turnitin. I use that in my master's program and in my doctoral program, and it works. And I think that for me, although we can't make a recommendation, I found it to be very helpful.
Yeah. And someone else asked me how many references I actually had for my dissertation. It was well over 300. Mainly because I also built in the habit on a regular basis to be updating my references. I never let them get outdated. So once a week, I was popping anything that was older than 3 years into Google Scholar and reading updated research to see how I can update them. So very good question.
Yeah.
Let's see. If I expected finish my dissertation by the year 2022, would be in my best interest 2017. Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb. I'm not gonna try to pronounce your name because I was gonna mess that up. But yeah, if you're thinking 2022, I would even push it up more to maybe 2018 as well. 2017, okay, that'll be about 5 years out at that point. I think 2 to 3 years in from your graduation date. Very good question. All right, is there an average of how many references are used? 50-50. All right, guys. Rebecca, what you can do is take some of your outmost backdated references, take them, put them into Google Scholar, and use the cited by function in there to actually look to see what's updated in there. It's just going to be work along the way. There's really no one set way to do that. Very, very
Right.
good.
And that is called research.
Yep. Yeah, I wish we can give you an easy way out of that, but it's not even possible. All right.
So Antonio, we did post the Rudy, are you going to post the link again? Okay, looks like he did.
Done.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So again, you guys, thank you for coming. The link is in there. All of our PowerPoints from previous webinars are there. Mine was on a series, so it's good to go back, look at those to see how we got up to this point. And like I said, next week, Dr. Garrett won't be here, but I will be back. We're going to talk through the core designs and best ways to use this in addition to what was presented here. So if you still have more questions, we got more time, and the team here to actually help.
Dr. Johnson, where will they find the alignment table?
The alignment table, I believe, is in DC, but if it's not, I will have.
It's in the proposal template at the end of chapter 1 of the new proposal template.
All right, thank you, Dr. Garrett. See, there you go. Let's see. How do you? Oh, Latanya, the PowerPoint is actually going to be posted probably within the next hour. But the recordings, we won't be able to get those up for probably another 3 to 4 weeks. It takes a little time.
For Rebecca, you have a good question. How do you see the 2021 COVID modifications affecting availability of current research? There has been so much research over the past year and a half with COVID. If anything, I would say that it's increasing the research because people are adding another aspect or another layer of their research to include COVID-19. I had one of my learners that I'm chairing in her data collection. She saw how, even though she wasn't looking for COVID-19 or how it looked at, that was one of the themes that she uncovered in her search, was the how COVID-19 affected the changes especially in the education
Yep.
world.
Yep,
Mhm.
yep. So it has had a lot of implications on a number of things. So I definitely foresee some new opportunities emerging, but we have to give it time because we're still in it.
Mhm, yeah,
So,
yes.
so there is that. All right. So very, very good question. Hopefully you guys are, this was helpful. Brian or Rudy, did I miss anything?
No, we have a few more people who need to take the poll if you can.
Yes, please.
And then you want to let them know what Brian and Rudy's webinars will be on this month.
Yeah. All right,
Okay.
Brian and Rudy, you got the floor.
Yeah, so I'll be giving a webinar on returning learners, and really it could apply to any learners that have taken a break and are coming back into the program. It's going to be giving you some tools and strategies and resources to help you make the most of wherever you're at in your progress, help you streamline where you've been and where you're going.
Brian, that's going to be held on the 18th. Is that correct?
Yeah, should be the third Wednesday of the months.
Yes, 18th of August. And my webinar will be on August 25th, also at the same exact time, 4 p.m. Arizona time. And I will be discussing moving from the 10 strategic points to the prospectus. So for those of you who are at the prospectus stage, this might be helpful for you. If you're beyond the prospectus stage, you should probably avoid it because it will not apply.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so team, we're all good.
I'm going to end the poll now.
You're very welcome, Beth Ann. All right.
Okay, no more questions, and the poll is closed.